February 24th, 2026, 10:23 local time. The Arabian Sea, 140 nautical miles south of the Iranian coast. The USS Higgins is in what her crew calls the safe zone. The safe zone is a lie. At 10:23, a pair of Sumar cruise missiles, weapons that intelligence believed were reserved for strategic targets, not naval vessels, strike the USS Higgins from an unexpected angle. Not from the north, where Iran lies. From the southwest, where nothing should be. I'm your host at U.S. Defense Review, where we analyze the military operations that define global security. The November 14th attack rewrote everything the U.S. Navy thought it knew about Iranian reach, and the response, delivered in just 22 minutes, would demonstrate that American air power can strike anywhere, anytime, with devastating precision. Let's understand what happened. The USS Higgins is an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, Flight 2A configuration. Her mission on November 14th was straightforward. Provide air defense coverage for the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt, operating 200 nautical miles to the south in the northern Arabian Sea. Carrier defense is essential work. The Roosevelt is the most valuable ship in the American fleet. 100,000 tons of sovereign territory, carrying 75 aircraft and 5,000 personnel. Protecting her is why destroyers exist. The Higgins was positioned on the Roosevelt's northern picket, the first line of defense against any threat emerging from the direction of Iran. Her AN/SPY-1D radar was oriented northeast, watching the approaches from the Gulf of Oman and the Makran coast. She wasn't watching the southwest. Why would she? The southwest was open ocean. The nearest landmass was the coast of Oman, an American ally. The nearest Iranian territory was over 500 kilometers away. What the Higgins didn't know, what American intelligence hadn't detected, was that Iran had deployed a new capability. Submarine-launched land attack cruise missiles. The Sumar is Iran's longest-range cruise missile. Based on the Soviet Kh-55 design, which Iran had acquired through the Ukrainian black market decades earlier, the Sumar can fly over 2,500 kilometers. It's normally considered a strategic weapon, designed to strike land targets across the Middle East. No one expected Iran to use it against ships, but the Iranian Navy had modified 2 of their Fateh-class submarines to carry Sumar missiles. The submarines had deployed through the Strait of Hormuz 3 weeks earlier, transited south along the Omani coast, and taken position in the central Arabian Sea. They had been waiting for a target of opportunity. The Theodore Roosevelt carrier strike group was that target. At 10:19, the submarine Fateh, positioned 340 kilometers southwest of the Higgins, surfaced to launch depth and fired 2 Sumar missiles. The missiles flew at low altitude, skimming the waves, following a pre-programmed path that kept them hidden from American radar until the last possible moment. At 10:22:34, the Higgins's AN/SPY-1D detected 2 contacts approaching from bearing 237, the southwest. The radar had been oriented northeast. These contacts appeared in the peripheral coverage, detected late, already close. Range at detection, 23 nautical miles. Speed, Mach 0.77. Time to impact, approximately 96 seconds. The Combat Information Center erupted. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Vance, the tactical action officer, recognized the threat signature immediately. Cruise missiles, low altitude, high subsonic, coming from the wrong direction. "Weapons free, both contacts," she ordered. The Aegis system responded. 2 SM-2 Block 3A missiles launched at 10:22:42. 2 more followed at 10:22:46. 4 interceptors against 2 threats. The engagement should have been straightforward. SM-2S had successfully intercepted similar missiles dozens of times during the Gulf confrontation. But the Sumar wasn't a typical anti-ship missile. It was larger. It was designed to survive air defenses. And it carried countermeasures that the smaller Nor and C-802 variants didn't. At 10:23:41, the first SM-2 reached its intercept point. The Sumar deployed chaff, a cloud of metallic strips that confused the SM-2's radar seeker. The interceptor detonated in the chaff cloud, 40 meters from the actual missile. Fragments struck the SUMAR, damage to the airframe, but the missile kept flying. The second SM-2 engaged the same target 3 seconds later. This one scored a proximity kill, detonating close enough that the blast fragmentation destroyed the SUMAR's guidance system. The missile went ballistic, crashing into the sea 6 nautical miles from the Higgins. One threat eliminated. The third and fourth SM-2s engaged the second SUMAR. The third interceptor missed entirely. The SUMAR executed a pre-programmed terminal maneuver, a shallow dive that changed its altitude enough to throw off the intercept solution. The fourth SM-2 was closing. It was going to hit. At 10:23:58, the SUMAR's proximity sensor detected the approaching interceptor. The missile's warhead detonated prematurely, a self-destruct mechanism similar to what the college FARs had used against the Cole. The premature detonation occurred 800 meters from the Higgins. At 800 meters, most of the blast energy dissipated harmlessly, but the SUMAR carried a 450-kilogram warhead, far larger than standard anti-ship missiles. The fragmentation pattern was extensive. At 10:23:59, fragments struck the USS Higgins. The damage was distributed across the ship's starboard side. No single impact was catastrophic, but the cumulative effect was devastating. One fragment struck the bridge windows, shattering reinforced glass and wounding 2 watchstanders. Neither wound was fatal, but both sailors were temporarily blinded by glass fragments. One fragment struck the aft mast, destroying the ship's SATCOM antenna. Long-range communications were severed. One fragment struck the forward VLS cells. It didn't penetrate. The cells are armored. But the impact damaged the launch mechanism. 4 of the 32 forward cells were rendered non-functional. And one fragment, the largest, later estimated at 4 kilograms, struck the starboard phalanx CYWS mount. The phalanx is the ship's last line of defense, the 20mm Gatling gun that stops missiles when nothing else can. The fragment penetrated the mount's radome, the protective housing for the fire control radar. It destroyed the radar antenna. The phalanx on the starboard side was now useless. The Higgins had survived. She wasn't sinking. She wasn't on fire. Her crew was wounded, but alive. But she was hurt. Reduced defensive capability. Limited communications. Damage that would take weeks to repair. And somewhere to the southwest, an Iranian submarine was preparing to disappear. Captain David Morrison reached the bridge at 10:25, 87 seconds after the fragments hit. He had been in the CIC when the engagement began, coordinating the defensive response. What he found was a bridge in controlled chaos. Wounded personnel being treated. Shattered glass being cleared. Backup systems being activated. Status report, he demanded. The answers came quickly. 2 wounded on the bridge, non-critical. SATCOM down. 4 forward, VLS cells damaged. Starboard phalanx offline. Propulsion intact. Radar operational. Combat capability. Degraded, but functional. And then the critical question. Where did those missiles come from? The answer took 2 minutes to compile. Trajectory analysis. Launch bearing. Speed and flight profile data. Sir, based on the flight path, we estimate launch point was approximately 340 kilometers southwest. Open ocean. Nothing there except a submarine. Yes, sir. Morrison processed quickly. A submarine 340 kilometers away was beyond reach of any weapon the Higgins carried. Tomahawks could fly that far, but targeting a submerged submarine with a land attack missile was impossible. But the submarine wasn't the only target. The submarine had to have gotten its targeting data from somewhere. A submarine at periscope depth can't track surface targets hundreds of kilometers away. It needs external data, satellite, aircraft, or shore-based command. Iranian naval headquarters at Bandar Abbas had been the coordination center for submarine operations throughout the Gulf confrontation. If the Fateh had fired those missiles, Bandar Abbas had told it where to shoot. Morrison's communications were limited. The SATCOM was down, but his short-range tactical radio still worked. He could reach the Roosevelt. At 10:27, Morrison transmitted, "Roosevelt, Higgins Actual. We are hit by SUMAR cruise missiles. Submarine launch estimated 340 kilometers southwest. 2 wounded, systems damage, combat effective. Request immediate airstrike on Bandar Abbas Naval Command and any assets you can vector to prosecute the submarine. Higgins will coordinate. Rear Admiral James Thompson, commanding the Roosevelt Strike Group, received the transmission at 10:28. The request was audacious. Morrison wasn't asking for help defending his ship. He was asking for offensive strikes against Iranian territory. But Morrison was right. The submarine was beyond reach. The command center that had directed the attack was not. Thompson authorized the strike at 10:30. The assets were ready. The Roosevelt's air wing maintained aircraft on ready alert at all times. Within minutes of the authorization, those aircraft were launching. At 10:35, 4 FA-18E Super Hornets catapulted from the Roosevelt's deck. Call signs Talon 1 through 4. Loadout 8 AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles and 8 AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles. Their mission: neutralize any Iranian surface vessels or air defenses that might interfere with the main strike. At 10:37, 6 FA-18F Super Hornets launched. Call signs Hammer 1 through 6. Loadout 24 GBU 31J DAMS 2,000-pound GPS guided bombs. Their target, Bandar Abbas Naval Command Center. At 10:39, 2 EA-18G Growlers launched. Their mission, electronic warfare support, blind Iranian air defenses during the strike window. 12 aircraft, 40-plus weapons. Target, the facility that had coordinated the attack on the Higgins. The flight to Bandar Abbas would take approximately 35 minutes at combat speed. But the authorization, the launch, the commitment of forces, all of that happened within 22 minutes of the Higgins taking damage. At 10:45, 22 minutes after the SUMAR fragments struck, the strike package crossed into Iranian airspace. The Growlers led the assault. Their ALQ-99 jamming pods filled Iranian radar screens with noise. Their HARM missiles homed on any air defense radar that dared to radiate. 3 Iranian SA-2 sites went silent within the first 90 seconds. Their crews either destroyed by HARMs or smart enough to shut down before they were targeted. At 10:47, the Talon flight engaged. Iranian fast attack boats were scrambling from Bandar Abbas harbor, reacting to the approaching American aircraft. They were too late and too slow. 8 Harpoon missiles streaked toward the harbor. 4 struck boats that were attempting to flee. 2 struck boats still at their moorings. 2 malfunctioned and crashed into the water. 6 Iranian fast attack boats destroyed in under 30 seconds. Dozens of crew killed. At 10:48, the Hammer flight reached their release point. The Bandar Abbas Naval Command Center was a hardened facility. Reinforced concrete, underground sections, blast-resistant construction. It had survived previous strikes with only partial damage. 24 2,000-pound JDAMs were going to test that resilience. The first wave, 12 bombs, struck the facility's above-ground structures. Communications buildings, administrative offices, vehicle parks. Everything on the surface was cratered or collapsed. The second wave, 12 more bombs, targeted the underground sections. The weapons penetrated through rubble and earth, detonating among the bunkers and command centers below. Secondary explosions confirmed fuel and ammunition storage. Fire spread through the facility. Rescue and firefighting would be impossible for hours. At 10:53, the aircraft turned for home. The strike was complete. Bandar Abbas Naval Command Center, the facility that had coordinated the submarine attack on the Higgins, that had guided Iranian naval operations throughout the Gulf confrontation, was destroyed. Estimated casualties, 60 to 80 personnel, including several senior officers. The submarine that had launched the SUMARs was never found. It escaped into the deep waters of the Arabian Sea, eventually returning to port weeks later. But its support infrastructure was gone. Its command structure was eliminated. Its ability to conduct coordinated attacks was destroyed. The USS Higgins limped toward Bahrain, escorted by 2 other destroyers from the Roosevelt Strike Group. Her repairs would take 4 months, new SATCOM equipment, repaired VLS cells, new phalanx mount. The 2 wounded sailors recovered fully. The ship's crew received combat action ribbons. Captain Morrison received the Legion of Merit. The diplomatic response followed the established pattern: condemnation, countercharges, UN debate, inaction. But the tactical lesson was clear. Iran had demonstrated a new capability. Submarine-launched cruise missiles targeting ships in open ocean. They had proven they could reach American vessels beyond the traditional threat envelope. America had demonstrated something else. No matter where the attack came from, no matter how unexpected, the response would come within minutes. Not from the ship that was hit, though that ship would contribute if possible, but from the carrier strike group that dominated the theater. 22 minutes from impact to aircraft over target. That speed was possible because the assets were pre-positioned, pre-armed, pre-briefed. The carrier air wing didn't need hours to plan a strike. They needed minutes to execute one. The Sumar threat was real. Iran's submarines could launch missiles from unexpected angles, from unexpected distances, but those submarines needed command. They needed coordination. They needed the infrastructure that America had just destroyed. The November 14th engagement proved that even surprising tactical innovations couldn't overcome strategic asymmetry. Iran could develop new weapons and new tactics. America could destroy the systems that made those weapons useful. That's the math of modern warfare. Tactical creativity versus strategic depth. The side with deeper resources wins. Every time. Stay informed. Stay vigilant. I'll see you in the next one.